Russian revolutionary Leon Trotsky once said that revolution is impossible until it is inevitable. There comes a point when enough is enough, when the need for radical change becomes urgent and outweighs the risks of violent rebellion. But what happens when revolution leads to yet another, more insidious form of tyranny? That's what troubled George Orwell. Having observed the progress of the Russian Revolution in his lifetime, Orwell was inspired to allegorize it in the form of a farmyard fable. Remember, an allegory is a narrative whose plot, characters, or setting are used to symbolize or represent real-world issues or events. As it turned out, the Russian Revolution, which began in 1917, followed a recognizable pattern. It begins with unrest, which culminates in the violent overthrow of an old tyrannical regime. Then there's the establishment of a new, hopeful regime, which begins to betray the revolutionary ideals by increments. This then spirals into a reign of terror, and voila, welcome to your new tyrannical dictatorship. So let's look at the way Orwell depicts the cycle of revolution and tyranny in Animal Farm. The catalyst for the revolution is a stirring speech delivered by Old Major, Farmer Jones's prized boar. Old Major's rhetoric, or the persuasive power of his language, plants the seed of rebellion in the hearts of the discontented animals. After explaining how useless and tyrannical mankind is, Old Major asks his audience, "Is it not crystal clear then, comrades, that all the evils of this life of ours spring from the tyranny of human beings?" This rhetorical question, which is a question that doesn't expect an answer, points to the logical solution, the overthrow of the human race. Throughout Old Major's speech, Orwell capitalizes, or uses a capital letter, for man to highlight the status of humans as the arch-enemies of animals. The animals also begin to address each other as comrade, which means ally or fellow soldier. This is an allusion or reference to the Soviet revolutionaries and members of the Communist Party who used it as a form of address. For too long, the animals of Manor Farm have been exploited by Mr. Jones. He is a slovenly, drunken farmer whose neglect and abuse of the animals becomes unbearable. The final straw is when he forgets to feed the animals, so they flung themselves upon their tormentors. Jones and his men suddenly found themselves being butted and kicked from all sides. The visual imagery here helps us create a mental picture of the rebellion, which happens with no planning. The animals had simply reached their limit. And once the humans are ousted, the animals are overwhelmed with the joy of freedom. Yes, it was theirs. Everything that they could see was theirs. The jubilant tone or emotion in this exclamation expresses the animal's ecstatic triumph over tyranny. Remember, an exclamation is when a sentence ends with an exclamation mark. And they have plenty to celebrate because it's followed by a wave of rebelliousness through the countryside. There's an interesting metaphor here, which is when one thing is described as something else. The metaphor of the wave depicts how the spirit of revolution is infectious. It emboldens the downtrodden animals on neighbouring farms. A new regime is established on the newly named Animal Farm. It now had its own flag, democratic meetings on Sundays, and an anthem which they all proudly sang. Again, this is an allusion to the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, when the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was established with a flag, motto, emblem, and anthem. But just as the USSR saw the rise of Joseph Stalin, the newly named Animal Farm saw the rise of Napoleon. His ascendance to power happened the moment that 9 enormous dogs wearing brass-studded collars came bounding into the barn. Behold, Napoleon's private enforcers. They were huge dogs and as fierce-looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon. The visual imagery of the dogs and their loyalty to Napoleon characterises or depicts Napoleon as a despot. He becomes a tyrannical ruler who holds absolute power on the farm and enforces it through fear, cruelty, and oppression. Orwell reinforces this through proxemics, which is the way space is used or perceived in a scene. Previously, the animals held their meetings in the big barn and all sat around on the floor to discuss and vote on resolutions. But Napoleon's dramatic power grab results in a different use of the space, as he mounted onto the raised portion of the floor where Major had previously stood to deliver his speech. This represents his new high status on the farm. A short time later, as Napoleon settles into his power, the proxemics are adjusted again as Napoleon, with Squealer and another pig named Minimus, sat on the front of the raised platform, with the 9 young dogs forming a semicircle round them, and the other pigs sitting behind. The rest of the animals sat facing them in the main body of the barn. This new formation sends a clear message. No more discussions or debates. Napoleon is in charge. Follow orders, or else. The vague uneasiness among the animals over this new regime does escalate, but with terrible consequences. When Napoleon imposes slavish conditions on the hens, they launch a rebellion of their own. However, Napoleon acted swiftly and ruthlessly to starve the hens, which kills 9 of them. The adverbs swiftly and ruthlessly, which describe the verb acted, characterise Napoleon as a decisive tyrant, intolerant to challenges. After this episode, it's not long before Napoleon starts publicly executing other animals. They're brought forward to confess that they've been conspiring with Snowball, the outlaw. Afterwards, the dogs promptly tore their throats out. This continues until there was a pile of corpses lying before Napoleon's feet and the air was heavy with the smell of blood. The olfactory imagery helps us imagine what it smells like at these horrifying scenes. The stench of blood increases the atmosphere of menace as the animals are confronted by the spectacle of violent death. These executions are a historical allusion to the Great Purge of the Soviet Union in the late 1930s. Part of this nasty chapter were 3 highly publicised show trials held to prosecute Stalin's old rivals. They were accused of having conspired with Leon Trotsky, who was living in exile at the time, to terrorise the Soviet Union and assassinate Stalin. Of course, they were found guilty and executed, although they were later found to be innocent. Sound familiar? It should, because Snowball, the exiled enemy of Animal Farm, symbolises Leon Trotsky. And the poor animals executed by Napoleon's dogs symbolise the defendants in Stalin's show trials. But the betrayal of Boxer, Animal Farm's hardest working and most loyal comrade, is the novel's heartbreaking climax. When his great muscles finally give out, he is loaded onto a sinister-looking van. The one who can best read what's written on the side of the van is Benjamin, the cynical old donkey, who usually stays out of everything. But Boxer was his best friend, and Benjamin's panic is portrayed in his exclamations. "Fools! Fools!" shouted Benjamin. "Fools! Do you not see what is written on the side of that van? They are taking Boxer to the knackers!" Soon after this, Orwell pulls our heartstrings with the auditory imagery of a tremendous drumming of hooves inside the van, as Boxer was trying to kick his way out. This helps us imagine the sound of Boxer's great hooves as he tries to smash his way out. But it's too late, and Boxer is too weak. Greedy Napoleon has sold him to the glue factory. Boxer's fate symbolises that of the Russian working class. They fought to establish the Soviet Union, but were eventually betrayed by Stalin's communist regime. Orwell brings this so-called fairy story to its deeply ironic conclusion when the pigs start to walk on their hind legs, carry whips, dress in human clothes, dine with neighbouring farmers, and the original name of Manor Farm is reinstated. Remember, irony is when a situation appears the opposite of what's expected. The revolution against Mr. Jones was meant to liberate the animals from the tyranny of man and make them all rich and free. That was Old Major's dream. Instead, the animals are delivered into a bizarre nightmare where they are generally hungry, while Napoleon was seen strolling in the farmhouse garden with a pipe in his mouth. In the novel's denouement, or final resolution, Orwell delivers a chilling twist. As the animals watch the pigs and humans quarrelling over a card game, they looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which. And so, the revolution comes full circle. In rebelling against the old regime, the new leaders eventually become their old enemies. Thus, revolution and tyranny seem to go hand in hand. They're opposite sides of the same coin. While future revolutions are inevitable, can we learn from history and literature and do without the plot twist of tyranny? We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons, check out our other videos.